Hello, dear members of the Soul and Real Stories family. Today, we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. The Fated Encounter. Lightning slashed across the New York sky, streaks of blinding white tearing through the pitch-black night. Rain poured down like a torrent, heavy drops hammering against the windows of Memorial Hospital with a steady, menacing rhythm. Inside the stark white corridor, Sophia Reed emerged from the operating room, her hands still trembling faintly after 12 hours of battling to save a life. The wall clock read 11:45 p.m. She pulled down her mask, revealing a face pale with exhaustion, but her brown eyes remained sharp as the scalpel she'd just wielded. The gaze of a 28-year-old surgeon who refused to let failure define her. She had just saved a man with a ruptured aorta, yet the thrill of victory eluded her. Instead, there was the familiar emptiness, a shadow that had clung to her since the day her mother died. A medical error she, then a first-year med student, couldn't prevent. Sophia was intelligent, dedicated, but she lived a guarded life, erecting an invisible wall around herself with work as her only escape. She had just slumped into a chair in the break room when the phone in her pocket buzzed violently. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Sophia frowned, her fingers hesitating. Who would call at this hour? She answered, her voice thick with fatigue. "Hello, Sophia." "It's me, Chief Harris," came the familiar voice, but this time it trembled, stripped of its usual calm. "I need you right now. Go to the Westmore Hotel, private suite, 32nd floor. Absolute secrecy, no questions." "Understood." Sophia froze, her breath catching. The Westmore Hotel, a symbol of extravagance in the heart of Manhattan, a haunt for billionaires and politicians. "Sir, I just finished a surgery." "No time." He cut her off, his tone urgent as if fleeing something. "Go now, and be careful." The call ended, leaving a chilling, drawn-out beep in her ear. Rain still pounded down as Sophia stepped out of the hospital, her thin coat clinging to her from the water. She hurriedly flagged a taxi, her heart racing unnaturally. Something was wrong. Chief Harris wasn't one to panic. He taught her how to stay composed during the most critical surgeries. But his voice just now, it was as if he were afraid. The taxi glided through brightly lit streets, the glow of buildings blurring in the thick rain. When it stopped before the Westmore Hotel, Sophia looked up at the magnificent structure, marble columns gleaming, warm golden light spilling from the lobby. A tall, lean man in a black suit appeared at the entrance, wordlessly gesturing for her to follow. The hotel's hallway was eerily quiet, her shoes echoing on the marble floor like a lonely heartbeat. The elevator carried her to the 32nd floor, and as the private suite's door opened, a strange scent hit her, not the familiar sting of antiseptic, but sandalwood mixed with a sharp tang of blood. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, hazy golden light over a man seated in a red velvet armchair. His upper body was bare, muscles taut under the glow, but his left shoulder oozed blood, a deep gash stretching from collarbone to chest, fresh red trickling down his arm in a thin stream. Sophia froze, not because of the wound. She'd seen worse, but because of his eyes. Deep blue, cold as ice. They locked onto her with an unnatural calm, despite his obvious pain. He was beautiful, dangerously so, with disheveled black hair and a face chiseled from stone. She recognized him instantly. Nathan Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, one of New York's most powerful men. But now he looked more like a warrior fresh from battle than a billionaire tycoon. "Save me," he said, his voice low and firm like a command. "And don't ask anything." Sophia swallowed hard, setting her medical bag down, trying to maintain her professionalism despite her pounding heart. "You need to lie down," she replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. Nathan's lips twitched into a faint half-smile, but he complied, reclining on the chair with an odd tranquility. She knelt beside him, opening her bag for gloves and tools, her hands trembling slightly as she touched his skin to disinfect. It was feverishly hot, unlike someone losing blood. "This wound isn't shallow," she said, starting to stitch, her eyes focused on each suture. The blood's metallic scent mingled with his expensive cologne, forming a disquieting blend. She steadied her hands, not from the blood, but from the way he washed her, as if peeling back every thought in her mind. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice firm, breaking the stifling silence. Nathan didn't answer immediately, just tilted his head, his gaze fixed on her. "You don't want to know, Dr. Reed," he finally said, his tone low and deliberate, that cold half-smile returning. The way he said her name, full, without warmth, sent a shiver through her. How did he know her name? But she didn't press, continuing to stitch, though his response only deepened her curiosity. A cut like this wasn't random. It was deliberate, a calculated strike meant to inflict pain. Someone wanted him dead, yet he refused to elaborate, as if accustomed to living in the shadow of blades. She tied off the suture, applied a gauze pad, her hand lingering on his skin longer than necessary. "Done," she said, standing, forcing calm into her voice despite her racing pulse. "You need rest and no heavy movement." "No need," he interrupted, rising smoothly, slipping on his vest to cover the white bandage, though a small blood stain seeped through the black fabric. Sophia eyed the stain, unease rising. This man didn't care about his own life, either too confident or too familiar with danger. Through their brief exchange, she realized Nathan wasn't just leathily handsome. He carried a dangerous allure, a mix of absolute power and hidden pain. His eyes hinted at a larger secret, an abyss she wasn't ready to probe. "If you won't talk, I won't force you," she said, her tone edged with sarcasm. "But if you're not careful, I won't be here next time to patch you up." A spark flared in his eyes. Amusement. "Do you care about me, Dr. Reed?" he asked, his voice teasing but his gaze profound. Sophia stiffened, turning to pack her tools, hiding her fluster. "Care? No, she was just doing her job." But why did his question unsettle her? As she moved to leave, Nathan stepped closer, his presence dominating the space between them. His hand brushed her wrist, holding it for a fleeting second. Not hard, but enough for her to feel the strength beneath his suit. "You've just stepped into a dangerous game, Sophia," he whispered, using her first name alone for the first time, his voice soft yet chilling like a warning. "Be careful." Sophia pulled her hand back, meeting his eyes, searching for a clue to unravel them. But those blue depths were an endless void. "I don't play games," she retorted, "and I don't like threats." He gave a real smile, brief as it was. "I'm not threatening you," he said, stepping back. "I'm just stating the truth." She left the room, the door closing behind her with a sharp click. In the hallway, the rain sound persisted, but her mind was a tangle of unanswered questions. Inside, Nathan stood alone, touching his wound, blood staining his fingers. "She's not like the others," he murmured, his eyes glinting with an unreadable light. "Maybe she'll change everything, or destroy it all." Chapter 2. Unwittingly drawn into the vortex. 2 days had passed since that fateful night at the Westmore Hotel, and Sophia Reed thought it had all faded into oblivion, like the storm that had dissipated outside. She returned to her routine. Long shifts at Memorial Hospital, the steady beep of heart monitors, and the familiar scent of antiseptic. But deep within her, an unease simmered, as if something lurked, waiting. At first, she dismissed it as an echo of Nathan Blackwood's chilling gaze, the cryptic warning he left in that luxurious room. She tried to shake it off, telling herself she wasn't the type to get swept up in fanciful thoughts. But then signs began to emerge, small, yet enough to send shivers down her spine. That afternoon, as she crossed the bustling street near the hospital to grab coffee, a man in a baseball cap stood a few meters away, his strange gaze fixed on her. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. And when she turned to confirm, he'd vanished into the crowd. Sophia shook her head, convincing herself she was imagining things. But the next evening, as she left the hospital for her small Brooklyn apartment, a sleek black car lingered too long in front of her building, its engine idling, but no one stepping out. She paused, her hand tightening on her bag strap, feeling as though someone watched her every step. "I'm just tired," she muttered, hurrying inside. But her heart pounded harder than usual. The breaking point came on Tuesday night after she'd showered and sat on her sofa with a steaming cup of tea. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a text from an anonymous number. "You know too much." 5 short words, no period, no explanation, but enough to make the teacup slip from her hand and shatter on the floor. She sprang up, raced to the window, and yanked the curtains aside. The street was dark save for the faint glow of a street lamp, illuminating that familiar black car, still there, silent as a phantom. Sophia gripped her phone, her breathing ragged. This wasn't a prank. Someone was targeting her, and she didn't know why. Or rather, she didn't want to admit she'd already guessed the reason. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital with dark circles under her eyes from sleeplessness, struggling to focus on her shift. Her mind was a mess, questions without answers swirling. Was Nathan Blackwood involved? What did his talk of a dangerous game mean? She was slipping on her blouse when the break room door swung open, and a tall figure stepped in, making the air feel heavier. Nathan Blackwood stood there, his black suit pristine against his frame, dark hair neatly combed, but his deep blue eyes brimmed with worry, a look she'd never seen on him. "Sophia." He called her name, his voice low but urgent. "You're in danger because you saved me." She froze, her stethoscope dangling midair. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her tone firm but tinged with confusion. Nathan stepped closer, not giving her a chance to object, grabbing her wrist and pulling her out of the room. "No time to explain," he said, his voice resolute. "Come with me now." Sophia yanked her hand free, stepping back, her eyes blazing. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what this is about." But Nathan didn't answer, just fixed her with a cold, determined stare, then turned and strode down the hall, clearly expecting her to follow. She stood there, wrestling with herself for a few seconds. She should have called security, alerted the police, done anything rational. But the text, "You know too much," flashed in her mind, along with the black car and that eerie stare on the street. She clenched her teeth and dashed after him, her soft-soled white shoes echoing on the hospital floor. Nathan waited by a gleaming black SUV at the emergency exit, the door already open. "Get in," he ordered, and this time she didn't argue, though doubt nodded at her. The car sped through New York streets, a light drizzle starting to fall, blurring the windshield. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, clutching her seatbelt, turning to Nathan. "Tell me," she snapped, "what danger am I in, and why?" Nathan kept his hands on the wheel, eyes glued to the road, but his voice dropped icy. "My enemies don't forgive. I was attacked that night because I hold something they want. And now, because you saved me, you're a target." Sophia let out a scoff, incredulous. "A target? I just stitched you up. I don't know anything." But before Nathan could reply, a sharp crash rang out. The rear window shattered, a bullet grazing past her head and embedding in the front seat. Sophia screamed, ducking down, her face drained of color, a chill racing up her spine. Nathan floored the gas, the car surging forward, weaving through traffic. "Still think this is a joke?" he growled, gripping the wheel tightly, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Sophia didn't answer, her breathing rapid, hands clinging to the seat. The sound of breaking glass echoed in her ears, and for the first time, she realized she was truly caught in something beyond her control. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice shaky but forcing calm. "People who will kill to protect their secrets," Nathan replied, his tone cutting like a blade. And now you're part of it, whether you like it or not. The car veered onto a suburban road, leaving the city lights behind. Thick trees lined both sides, darkness enveloping them. The engine's roar, the only sound piercing the stillness. Finally, it stopped before a mansion tucked within the forest, a modern structure with glass walls and a sturdy steel gate, like an impregnable fortress. Nathan killed the engine and turned to her. The worry was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold resolve mixed with something she couldn't decipher. "Welcome to my world, Sophia," he said, his low voice resonating in the car's confined space. "There's no turning back." Sophia stared at him, then out at the darkness, her heart pounding. She wanted to argue, to run, but that bullet had shattered any illusions of her normal life. She was no longer just a doctor saving lives. She'd been dragged into a dangerous vortex, and the man beside her was its core. The car door opened, and as she stepped out, a cold wind blew through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and an ominous foreboding. Nathan stood behind her, his tall figure a silent affirmation. From this moment, her life was forever changed. Chapter 3. His World. Nathan Blackwood's mansion emerged from the darkness like an impregnable fortress, nestled within the forest on the outskirts of New York. Towering glass walls reflected the faint moonlight, cold and modern, yet exuding a mysterious aura that made Sophia Reed shudder. As she passed through the heavy steel gate, the wind whistled through the dense treetops, carrying the scent of damp earth and dry leaves, as if whispering secrets this place concealed. She paused for a second at the threshold, her soft-soled white shoes muddied from their recent escape. Inside, light from recessed LED fixtures in the ceiling bathed the glossy black marble floor, giving the sensation that she'd stepped into the lair of a predator. Beautiful, but deadly. Nathan walked ahead, his tall frame in a pristine black suit leading the way, not glancing back, as if accustomed to others trailing behind him. Sophia entered, and the automatic door shut behind her with a sharp click, severing all ties to the outside world. She glanced around, her breathing still rapid from the attack on the road. The expansive living room stretched before her, minimalist, with black leather chairs, a glass table, and a built-in electric fireplace crackling softly, though it couldn't dispel the chill seeping into her bones. A massive abstract painting hung on the wall, its red and black lines intertwining like flowing blood, involuntarily reminding her of the wound on his shoulder from their first encounter. "This is your house?" she asked, her voice dry, trying to break the stifling silence. "This is where I hide," Nathan replied without turning, his low voice steady as if stating the obvious. He stepped to a small bar in the corner, pouring a glass of whiskey, but instead of drinking, he set it on the table, his gaze sweeping over her. "Sit. You need to rest." Sophia frowned, disliking his commanding tone, but her weary legs compelled her to comply. She sank into a chair, her hands still clutching her medical bag like a final shield. The hours that followed unfolded in a strange space where the tension from the attack gradually gave way to unexpected revelations about Nathan Blackwood. Through terse sentences, he revealed he was the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, a tech conglomerate worth billions, specializing in artificial intelligence and data security. But behind the glamour of economic headlines lay another world, one where he was entangled in covert battles with ruthless rivals. "They want what I have," he said, twirling the glass of whiskey without touching it to his lips. "And they'll do anything to get it." Sophia studied him, trying to reconcile the image of the resolute, decisive man before her with the one attacked in that hotel room. He was a paradox, absolute power paired with a striking solitude. She caught a rare moment when he stood by the window, gazing out at the pitch-black forest, moonlight illuminating his face, highlighting his sharp features. But his deep blue eyes were distant, brimming with hurt. He said nothing, just stood there, hands in his pockets, as if lost in a memory she couldn't reach. "Don't you ever get tired?" she asked, her voice softer than intended. "Living like this, always running, always fighting." Nathan turned, his eyes sliding over her, and for the first time, she saw a faint smile flicker. Not cold, not teasing, but tinged with sadness. "Tired," he answered. "But I don't have a choice." A spark of emotion between them emerged unexpectedly by day's end, when Nathan suddenly disappeared into the kitchen, a small nook tucked behind the living room she hadn't noticed earlier. She heard the sound of a knife on a cutting board, boiling water, and the aroma of sautéed garlic wafted through. "What are you doing?" she asked, rising and approaching. Nathan turned, holding a pan, his vest shed, sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular arms. "Cooking," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing. Before her was a modest dinner, spaghetti with tomato sauce, garlic, and herbs, far less lavish than she'd expect from someone like him. "I don't have a chef," he explained, placing the plate in front of her, "and I thought you were hungry." Sophia looked at the pasta, then at him, her heart stirring slightly. It wasn't the food, though it tasted better than she'd anticipated, but the moment itself. The man she'd once seen as a cold, unfeeling power broker now stood here, cooking for her in a tiny kitchen within his fortress. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice lowering. Nathan sat across from her, not eating, just watching her, the whiskey glass still spinning in his hand. "Because I want you to see," he said. "I'm not just what you read in the papers. I'm working on a project, an AI system that could change how the world works. Not for money, but to protect what's left of it." His words caught her off guard. It wasn't the arrogance of a CEO, but a genuine aspiration laced with a hint of fragility. She ate slowly, feeling the warmth of the meal spread through her chilled body. They talked. Not much, but enough for her to glimpse a different Nathan. He spoke of his early startup days, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, and though he didn't say it outright, she sensed the loneliness beneath his words. For the first time, she didn't see him as a threat. She saw him as a person, scared not just on his shoulder, but in his soul. That night, as she stood on the mansion's small balcony, gazing at the moonlight filtering through the trees, Nathan appeared beside her. He stood closer than usual, so close she could feel the heat from his body, the faint scent of sandalwood cologne drifting over. A gentle breeze led her hair, and he reached out, tucking a strand behind her ear with a slow, deliberate motion. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Sophia," he said, his voice deepening, his breath brushing her hair, warm and oddly intimate. Sophia turned, meeting his eyes, her heart pounding harder than she'd admit. Those blue eyes were no longer cold. They were soft, profound, as if beckoning her into a world she'd never known. She didn't reply, just stood there, letting the silence stretch between them. Under the moonlight, in that fleeting moment, the wall between them seemed to thin, revealing an invisible thread forming, fragile yet strong enough to make her wonder if she could turn back. Nathan didn't push further, stepping back to give her space to breathe. But his gaze remained fixed on her, a promise that this wasn't the end. Beyond, the forest whispered in the wind, and Sophia knew, whether she wanted it or not, she had truly entered his world. A place with no easy exit. Chapter 4. Danger closes in. Nathan Blackwood's mansion, once cold and silent like an impregnable fortress, shattered in an instant with a deafening explosion. Sophia stood on the balcony, moonlight filtering through the trees, when the ground shook violently beneath her. The sound of glass shattering rang out like a chaotic symphony, shards from the massive living room window flying in all directions, glinting under the lights before crashing onto the marble floor. A bomb, not large, but powerful enough to obliterate the veneer of safety she'd thought this place offered. Sophia stumbled, gripping the railing, her heart pounding as smoke and dust filled the air. Through the thick haze, she heard rapid footsteps and Nathan's shout, "Sophia, get down here." She rushed inside, bare feet crunching over broken glass, blood seeping from her soles, but she paid it no mind. The living room was now a ruin, leather chairs torn apart, the electric fireplace sparking, and Nathan pinned beneath a large shattered pane, blood flowing again from the old wound on his shoulder. His face was pale, but his deep blue eyes burned with determination. "Nathan!" Sophia screamed, lunging to his side, her trembling hands yanking the glass off him, blood soaking through the white shirt he wore, warm and vivid red against her fingers. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice firm despite the fear hammering in her chest. But then gunshots erupted from the front door, shredding the last remnants of stillness. Sophia ducked, dragging Nathan behind an overturned sofa, using it as a makeshift shield. The gunfire was relentless, bullets embedding into the walls, plaster dust falling like rain. She scanned the room, spotting her medical bag a few meters away amidst the debris. "Don't," Nathan rasped, his hand clutching her wrist. But she shook him off, her eyes blazing. "I'm not letting you die here," she snapped, then darted out, crawling across the glass-strewn floor to grab the bag. A bullet grazed her shoulder, ripping her blouse, but she didn't stop. When she returned to Nathan's side, her hands were slick with blood, his and hers, but she ignored it. She opened the bag, pulling out gloves and tools, starting first aid as gunfire echoed nearby. Her hands moved swiftly, professionally, as they had hundreds of times in the operating room. She tore his shirt open, exposing the old wound now torn wide, blood streaming freely. "Hold on," she said, her voice shaky but controlled, pressing hard against the wound to staunch the flow. Nathan gritted his teeth, his breathing labored, but he didn't groan, just watched her, his gaze a mix of pain and awe. She grabbed gauze, pressing it firmly to his shoulder, her other hand rummaging for a needle and thread in the bag. The gunfire thinned, then ceased. Her attackers seemed to have retreated, but she didn't dare pause. She stitched quickly, each suture piercing his flesh evenly, blood staining her gloves red. "You've got this," Nathan whispered, his voice faint but carrying an odd strength. When she tied off the thread, the roar of car engines sounded outside the gate, then faded into the forest. The attackers were gone, leaving a deathly stillness over the ruined room. Sophia collapsed onto the floor, hands trembling, breath ragged. She turned to Nathan, shouting, "What's happening?" Her voice broke, no longer able to maintain its calm facade. Nathan, though weak, reached for her hand, his cold fingers gripping hers tightly, unwilling to let go. "I have something they want," he said, his voice harsh. "Evidence of their crimes, corruption, murder, everything. They won't stop until they get it or kill me." Sophia stared at him, her mind reeling. Evidence, crimes. She'd only wanted to save him, not get entangled in something this vast. But then she recalled the bullet grazing her head in the car, the explosion moments ago, and the blood on her hands now. She was no longer an outsider. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Nathan closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, but his hand still clung to hers. "Because I didn't want you to be afraid, didn't want you to run." His words stopped her cold. She looked at him, the man she'd seen as powerful, invincible, now lying here, blood pooling on the floor, his eyes revealing a vulnerability she'd never witnessed. He wasn't the steel wall she'd imagined, but a real person, fragile, and needing her more than ever. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice rough, as if trying to push her away from the danger. But Sophia shook her head, tightening her grip on his hand. "I don't abandon anyone," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline shaking her body. In that moment, amid the wreckage and the scent of smoke, something ignited between them, not words, but a connection deeper than she'd imagined. She saw him, trembling yet resolute, and he saw her, terrified yet unwavering. His blue eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she felt a warmth pierce the icy shield he always wore. "Thank you," he murmured, his fingers brushing the back of her hand, a small gesture that made her heart skip a beat. But the quiet didn't last. Police sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flashing through the night. Nathan opened his eyes, his gaze sharpening with resolve. "We have to run," he said, struggling to sit up despite his body's protests. Sophia supported him, her arm around his shoulders, feeling his weight press against her. "Run where?" she asked, her voice panicked. "Anywhere," he answered, his tone low and firm. "I won't let you die because of me." She helped him stand, blood dripping from her feet to mingle with his on the floor. They staggered out of the ravaged room, the sirens growing louder. Nathan led her to a garage out back, where a sleek black off-road vehicle waited. He opened the door, nearly collapsing into the driver's seat, but gestured for her to get in. "Hurry," he growled, and Sophia didn't hesitate, leaping into the passenger side. The car roared out of the mansion, tires grinding over gravel as it sped into the dark forest. Through the rearview mirror, she saw police lights flickering in the distance, but Nathan didn't look back. He stared ahead, hands gripping the wheel, blood seeping through the bandage on his shoulder. "Where are we going now?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling but no longer fearful, just an acceptance that she'd ventured too far. Nathan didn't answer immediately, glancing at her with eyes full of pain and determination. "Somewhere they can't find us," he said, his low voice cutting through the engine's roar. "I promise to keep you safe." And in that moment, amid the darkness and imminent danger, Sophia knew there was no turning back, not just from his world, but from him. Chapter 5. The distance fades. After their escape from the ravaged mansion, Sophia Reed and Nathan Blackwood sought refuge in a small seaside retreat hours away from New York by car. As the off-road vehicle rolled to a stop before the simple wooden house nestled against the sandy shore, the gentle lapping of waves welcomed them like a soothing lullaby. The night sky was crystal clear, free of the smoke and gunfire's shadow, with only the silvery moonlight stretching across the shimmering sea. Sophia stepped out, her bare feet touching the cool sand, and for the first time in days, she felt she could breathe. Danger seemed left behind, at least for now, and the tranquil space drew her and Nathan closer, as if they'd been granted a rare moment to forget the blades lurking in the dark. The little house was unlike anywhere Nathan had taken her before, not lavish like the Westmore Hotel, nor cold like the suburban mansion. It was rustic, with weathered wooden walls faded by sea breezes, large windows opening to the ocean, and a small porch with 2 worn rocking chairs. Inside, light from a simple hanging lamp illuminated a wooden table and frayed upholstered chairs, creating a warmth akin to a true home. Nathan dropped the keys on the table, shedding his blood-crusted vest to reveal the dusty bandage on his shoulder. "This place is mine," he said, his voice low but gentler than usual. "No one knows about it." Sophia nodded, asking no more, quietly sinking into a chair to let the peace of the place seep into her tense frame. The hours that followed passed in a pleasant stillness. Nathan found an old bottle of red wine in the kitchen cabinet, pouring 2 glasses, despite the faint tremor in his hands from his injury. They sat on the porch, glasses resting on the chair arms, and for the first time, they didn't speak of danger, evidence, or the pursuers hunting them. Instead, they began sharing pieces of themselves, stories they'd kept locked away, as if this place had washed off the armor they always wore. Nathan gazed at the sea, his eyes distant, and started to speak. "My father died when I was young," he said, his voice even but carrying a deep sadness. "A car accident, at least that's what they said. I grew up with my mother, but she couldn't handle the pressure from the Blackwood family. I had to take over the company at 22, with no other choice." He paused, his hand tightening around the glass. "People think I wanted power, but really, I just wanted to survive." Sophia listened, her heart aching as she realized how alike they were, both bound by their past, forced to be strong despite the scars within. She set her glass down, looking at him, and for the first time, she opened up. "My mother died from a medical error," she said, her voice low, each word like a cut. "I was there in the hospital, But I was just a first-year student. I couldn't do anything. She passed right in front of me. And I swore I'd never let anyone die on my hands again. That's why I became a doctor." Nathan turned to her, his deep blue eyes quiet, not judging, just listening. A silent empathy bloomed between them, drawing them closer like two broken fragments, finding each other amid a storm. The night deepened, the sky glittering with stars like jewels scattered on a black canvas. They left the porch, stepping onto the cold sand, the waves brushing the shore like a tender melody. Sophia stood there, the sea breeze tussling her brown hair, and Nathan moved closer, closer than ever before. He said nothing, only lifted a hand to her cheek, his cold fingers oddly warm as they grazed her skin. She looked up, their eyes meeting, and time seemed to halt under the starlight. Nathan pulled her into his arms, his strong yet gentle embrace enveloping her as if he'd been waiting for this moment for ages. His lips found hers, and their first kiss ignited, fiery yet tender, intense yet reverent. His breath mingled with hers, the sea's saltiness seeping into every sense, and in that instant all distance between them melted away. The kiss lingered unhurried, as if they were both trying to memorize every sensation, every heartbeat of the other. When they parted, Sophia rested her head on his chest, hearing his heart thud powerfully beneath his thin shirt. He held her tighter, his hand stroking her hair, and their silence spoke more than words ever could. She felt the warmth of his body, the faint scent of sandalwood cologne, and a rare peace flooded her. "I never thought I'd find this," Nathan whispered, his voice low and rough, almost lost in the waves. "Find what?" she asked, looking up at him. "You," he replied, his gaze locking onto hers, deep and sincere. They stood there, wrapped in each other under the starry sky, the waves beating in time with their breaths. Sophia leaned into him, feeling his steadiness, and a sweet happiness crept into her heart, a feeling she never imagined possible on this razor's edge between life and death. But then, amid that warmth, a thought flickered in her mind, cold and sharp as a blade. Will this happiness last? She didn't voice it, just tightened her arms around him, as if to hold on to this moment before it slipped away. Nathan bent down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, and his tenderness made her want to believe, even just a little, that they could overcome anything. That night, they sat on the sand, shoulder to shoulder, hands intertwined, letting the waves and stars bear witness to the turning point in their hearts. The modest retreat became an oasis amid the storm of their lives, where they were no longer doctor and CEO, victim and protector, just Sophia and Nathan, two souls finding each other in the darkness. Yet deep within her, the question lingered, a faint cloud on a perfect sky. Was this happiness truly hers, or merely a fleeting dream before the nightmare returned? Chapter 6. A Test of Trust. The seaside retreat remained serene like a perfect painting under the morning sun, but a sudden cold breeze swept through, carrying an unease Sophia Reed couldn't explain. After their kiss beneath the stars the previous night, she and Nathan Blackwood had found a fragile closeness, as if they could momentarily forget the dangers lurking beyond. This morning, she stood in the small kitchen, brewing coffee with an old machine, the rich aroma filling the air. Nathan sat on the porch, phone in hand, his gaze distant toward the sea. She smiled faintly, thinking this moment, however brief, was a rare gift amid the storm of their lives. But then everything changed in an instant. Sophia stepped onto the porch, intending to bring him coffee, when she heard his voice through the slightly open door. Low, tense, not the gentle tone he'd used with her last night. "I need information from Memorial," he said, his hand gripping the phone tightly. "That hospital's involved. Yes, I know the consequences, but we have no choice." Sophia froze, the coffee cup trembling in her hand, liquid sloshing over the edge. Memorial, her hospital, where she worked, where she'd spent thousands of hours saving lives. What was he saying? Some kind of conspiracy. She stood there, breath quickening, straining to hear more. If they find out, we'll lose everything, he continued, his voice cold like when he faced enemies. But I need that data, no matter the cost. She stepped inside, unable to hold back any longer. The coffee cup slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the wooden floor and shattering into pieces, the sound startling Nathan into turning around. His deep blue eyes widened for a moment before swiftly regaining their usual calm. "Sophia," he said, ending the call abruptly, but it was too late. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice shaking, not from fear, but from a rising sense of betrayal surging in her chest. Nathan stood, stepping closer, raising a hand as if to soothe her. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Trust me. Trust you." Sophia stepped back, her fiery gaze piercing into him. "You just mentioned my hospital, where I work, where I put my faith, in a secret phone call, and you tell me to trust you. What are you doing, Nathan? Using me as a pawn in your game?" Her voice broke, the days of fear, flight, and even last night's kiss, now stabbing her heart like a blade. Nathan shook his head, moving closer, but she thrust a hand up to stop him. "Don't come near me," she snapped. "Tell me the truth. What is it?" He fell silent, his eyes sweeping over her, and that silence poured fuel onto the fire within her. "I can't tell you everything now," he finally said, his voice dropping, almost pleading. "But I swear I'm not doing anything to hurt you." Sophia let out a bitter laugh, tears welling but held back. "Not hurt me. You dragged me into this damn world, got me shot at, hunted, and now you're using my hospital for some scheme I know nothing about. I trusted you, Nathan," she shouted, her voice shattering, hands clenching into fists. "I trusted you with my life." Nathan stood motionless, his face paling, but he didn't argue back. She spun around, storming inside, her trembling hands gathering her things, medical bag, jacket, anything she could carry. "Sophia, don't," he called after her, his voice following her into the small living room. "You don't understand. Going out there now is suicide. They're still looking for us." But she didn't listen, didn't want to. She slipped on her shoes, turning to face him one last time, her eyes brimming with pain and disillusionment. "I'd rather face them than stay here with someone I can't trust," she said, her voice icy. "Goodbye, Nathan." She flung the door open and stepped outside, not looking back, though her heart felt crushed. The cold sand pressed against her feet, the sea breeze whipping through her hair, carrying the salt of tears she could no longer hold back. She knew she was walking into danger, knew those hunting them might be waiting out there, but the sting of betrayal outweighed any bullet's threat. She called a taxi from a nearby town, climbed in, and as the car rolled along the coastal road, she glanced out the window, watching Nathan's figure on the porch shrink and vanish around a bend. In the now empty house, Nathan stood alone, his hand clutching the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. He stared out at the sea, where the morning sun still shone brightly, but all he saw was darkness. "I didn't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice breaking in the quiet space. He slammed his fist against the wall, the impact echoing sharply, but the pain in his hand couldn't compare to the ache in his chest. He'd hidden the truth not to deceive her, but to shield her from a larger secret. Data from the hospital tied to an illegal medical trial his enemies had orchestrated, evidence he needed to bring them down. But now, he realized, he'd lost the most precious thing: her trust. In the taxi, Sophia sat huddled, clutching her medical bag, tears silently streaming down her face. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to return to New York, to her own life, no matter how dangerous it might be. Images of Nathan, the kiss under the stars, the dinner he'd cooked, his distant gaze, flashed in her mind, but they were now just a deep wound. She'd opened her heart to him, trusted him with everything, and he'd concealed something tied to her very existence. "How foolish I was," she murmured, wiping her tears, but the pain didn't fade. The taxi sped along winding roads, carrying her away from the seaside house, away from Nathan. She didn't know where this choice would lead, safety or death, but she couldn't stay, couldn't bear the betrayal a second longer. Outside, the sky remained bright, but within her was a night with no escape. And Nathan, alone in the empty house, stared at the chair where she'd sat, knowing he'd just lost the only person who'd ever made him feel less alone. Chapter 7. Love and Courage. Sophia Reed stepped out of the taxi in front of her small Brooklyn apartment, the dim street lights casting a faint glow over the quiet street. It had been 2 days since she left the seaside retreat, abandoning Nathan Blackwood and his lies. She was exhausted, dark circles shadowing her sleepless eyes, her heart heavy with the sting of betrayal. But as she inserted her key into the lock, an odd sound echoed behind her. The sharp, deliberate tap of hard-soled shoes on the pavement. She turned, but before she could react, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her into the dark alley beside her building. Her medical bag clattered to the ground, the metallic clang ringing through the silent night. She thrashed, nails clawing at her attacker's arm, but a harsh blow to her head sent her crumpling, consciousness slipping into blackness. At the same moment, back at the seaside house, Nathan stood before his desk, gripping his phone, his eyes sharp and cold. After Sophia's departure, he'd contacted a trusted source, a hacker who'd once worked for him, to check on her safety, but the news he received froze his blood. She's been taken. They know where she is. Nathan slammed his hand on the table, a glass shattering, shards embedding in his skin, though he didn't care. "It's a trap," the source warned over the phone. "They want to lure you out." He didn't reply, simply ended the call, grabbed his car keys, and bolted out the door. He knew it was his enemy's snare, but he couldn't let Sophia die, not after all she'd done for him, not when he'd realized she meant more to him than anything else. Sophia awoke in an abandoned warehouse, her hands bound tightly behind her with rope, her mouth sealed with duct tape. Her head throbbed, dried blood crusting her temple, but her eyes blazed with defiance as she scanned the figures around her. 5 black-clad assassins, masked, guns at the ready. A tall one with a gravelly voice stepped forward, crouching to meet her gaze. "You're the perfect bait to draw Blackwood in," he said, a sinister grin flashing beneath his mask. "He'll come, and we'll finish him." Sophia clenched her jaw behind the tape, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from anger. Anger at herself for leaving, at Nathan for pulling her into this, and at fate for trapping her here. The roar of an engine echoed outside, and the warehouse's iron door buckled under the impact of Nathan's sleek black off-road vehicle. He leaped out, unarmed, without a plan, only his deep blue eyes burning with resolve and fury. The assassins opened fire, bullets whizzing through the air, but Nathan moved like a phantom, ducking shots and charging the nearest one. He drove a fist into the man's face, wresting the gun from his grip, and shot down another before a bullet struck his shoulder, the left one, where the old wound hadn't fully healed. Blood sprayed, but he didn't falter, fighting on alone against the killers. Sophia screamed behind the tape, eyes wide as Nathan fell once, then rose again, blood staining his white shirt red. He moved like a machine, impervious to pain, punching, shooting, grappling with each one. A thug lunged from behind, a gleaming knife at his throat, but Nathan spun, slamming an elbow into the man's face, dropping him. By the fourth, a bullet hit his leg, forcing him to his knees, his breathing ragged, yet his eyes stayed fixed on Sophia. "I'll get you out," he roared, his voice raw. And with his last surge of strength, he fired, the bullet piercing the final assassin's chest before the man could pull the trigger. The warehouse fell silent save for Nathan's labored breathing and the groans of the fallen strewn across the floor. He dragged himself to Sophia, blood trailing behind him, his shaking hands cutting her ropes. She tore the tape from her mouth, gasping deeply, then rushed to catch him as he nearly collapsed. "Nathan," she cried, tears spilling as she saw him bleeding for her. He leaned heavily against her, his hand gripping her shoulder, blood soaking through her clothes, warm and terrifying. "Let's go," he whispered, but his legs gave out, and they both sank to the floor, her arms clutching him to keep him upright. "Don't die," Sophia sobbed, her trembling hands pressing his shoulder wound, trying to stem the flow as she had in the mansion. "I can't lose you. Not now." Nathan looked at her, his blue eyes dimming from blood loss but still glowing with a flicker of warmth. He touched her cheek, his cold fingers brushing her tears. "I love you, Sophia," he rasped, his voice frail but certain, as if it were the last thing he needed to say. "I've always loved you, since that first night." His words hit her like a blow to the heart. Sophia held him tighter, tears falling onto his chest, mingling with his blood. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking, realizing his true love lay not in words, but in this act, rushing into death to save her, defying everything. She kissed his forehead, her lips trembling, feeling his faint breath against her skin. "Don't leave me," she pleaded, squeezing his hand as if to anchor him to her. Nathan managed a weak smile, his hand dropping to the floor, but his eyes stayed locked on hers, as if memorizing her face in his final moments. Sophia refused to let go, her free hand digging into the nearby medical bag, grabbing gauze and hemostatic agents, doing all she could to save him. Police sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flashing through the warehouse's gaps, but she didn't care. Only he mattered, the man who'd sacrificed everything for her. When the police burst in, they found Sophia cradling Nathan, blood staining them both, but her tears had stopped. She looked at him, seeing his shallow breaths persist, a spark of hope igniting within her. "You'll live," she whispered, stroking his hair, "because I won't let you go anywhere." Nathan didn't reply, but his fingers twitched, squeezing hers faintly, a silent vow that he'd fight for her, for the love they just found on the edge of life and death. Chapter 8. Truth and Justice. Police sirens blared through the night, red and blue lights flashing through the darkness of the abandoned warehouse, where Sophia Reed and Nathan Blackwood had just escaped death's grasp. Sophia knelt beside Nathan, her hands soaked with his blood and her own, but her eyes burned with resolve as the police stormed in. Nathan, weakened by blood loss, still gripped her hand tightly, his breathing labored but his voice firm. "We have to end this." She nodded without hesitation, retrieving a small USB drive from his jacket pocket, the evidence he'd risked his life to protect. Documents, videos, and recordings of the crimes committed by their rival corporation, Vanguard Tech, corruption, medical fraud, and meticulously covered-up murders. This was the moment to expose it all. The police took them to the hospital first, where Sophia refused arrest, insisting on overseeing Nathan's surgery herself. She stood outside the operating room, hands trembling but eyes never leaving him through the glass. When he was wheeled out, alive, though unconscious, she exhaled in relief, knowing they'd crossed the threshold of death. As soon as Nathan awoke, he clasped her hand, his voice raspy. "Give it to them. Finish this." Sophia didn't waver, contacting a detective she'd met during a past accident case, an honest, reliable man. They met him at the station that night, handing over the USB along with detailed statements. Vanguard tested illegal drugs on patients at Memorial, Nathan said, his voice faint but sharp. "They killed to cover it up, and they wanted me dead because I have this proof." The following days were a whirlwind of decisive action. The police launched an urgent investigation, raiding Vanguard Tech's Manhattan headquarters. The files on the USB, internal emails, forged contracts, surveillance footage, laid bare a criminal network spanning years. Hundreds of unwitting patients used as guinea pigs, millions of dollars embezzled, and executives recorded confessing their guilt. Sophia stood by Nathan at a public press conference, her eyes shining as the detective announced the arrest of Vanguard CEO, Victor Kane, and dozens of accomplices. Camera shutters clicked incessantly, reporters jostling to snap photos of the pair. the young doctor and enigmatic CEO who toppled a criminal empire. Victory came swiftly, but not easily. Sophia and Nathan became the media's focal point. Their names splashed across every outlet, from the New York Times to evening news broadcasts. Heroes and survivors. One headline read, paired with a photo of Sophia bandaging Nathan in the warehouse. Yet amid the flood of light and noise, they only looked at each other in silence. In the hospital room after the cameras left, Nathan sat on the bed, his arms still bandaged, gazing at her with a rare smile. Not cold, not teasing, but warm. Sophia sat beside him, their hands intertwined, his warmth spreading through her. "We did it," she said softly. Nathan nodded, squeezing her hand. "Now we're free," he replied, his deep voice resonating like a promise. And for the first time, she believed the nightmare was truly over. Outside, New York glowed with lights, but in that moment, it was just them. Two lost souls who'd found each other amid truth and justice. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, knowing that no matter how noisy the world became, they'd found peace together. Chapter 9. A perfect ending. 3 months later, Sophia Reed stepped into the private suite at the Westmore Hotel, the place where it all began. Gone were the blood and tension of that fateful night. The room now glowed with warm golden light, white roses adorning every table, and the soft strains of a violin drifting from a hidden corner. She wore a simple yet elegant pale green silk dress, her brown hair cascading freely, her eyes sparkling as she saw Nathan Blackwood standing there, impeccable in a black suit, his deep blue eyes locking onto her as they had the first time they met. He smiled, stepping closer, and before she could speak, he dropped to one knee, opening a ring box to reveal a diamond glinting under the lights. "You saved me, Sophia," he said, his voice low but brimming with emotion. "Not just that night, but every day since. Now let me spend my life loving and protecting you. Will you marry me?" Sophia stood stunned, her heart racing, tears welling, but a smile breaking through as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, and as he slid the ring onto her finger, she pulled him up, hugging him tightly. In the room where they'd once faced death, their kiss was sweet, profound, a testament that all suffering was behind them, and the future was theirs. "I thought I'd lost you," she said as their lips parted, her hand brushing his cheek. Nathan smiled faintly, kissing her forehead. "You'll never lose me." Their wedding took place a month later on the beach, where they'd once found each other at the small retreat, under a blazing red sunset. Sophia emerged in a pristine white gown, the silk hugging her form, its long train flowing lightly in the breeze. She was radiant, her smile brighter than the fading daylight, her brown eyes gleaming as she looked at Nathan at the aisle's end, his white suit fitting his tall frame, his gaze never straying from her for a second. The waves murmured in rhythm with their vows. "I promise to love and protect you, no matter the challenges." As they exchanged rings, friends and colleagues applauded, but for Sophia and Nathan, only each other existed in that moment. Two once lost souls now bound forever. That night, under the stars, they danced barefoot on the sand, their laughter mingling with his warm, deep voice. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, drawing her closer. Sophia rested her head on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased, and they both laughed. A clear, joyful sound in the dreamy setting. The celebration stretched past midnight, but when the guests departed, they stayed hand in hand, walking to the shore to watch the moonlit water shimmer. They stood there, fingers laced, pledging to each other once more, not with words, but with their eyes, in a sacred silence. "Whatever happens," Nathan said, his voice firm, "we'll face it together." Sophia nodded, squeezing his hand. "Together," she replied, and they kissed, long and deep, a vow that nothing could tear them apart. Before them lay the future, a happy one, free of the past's shadows, filled only with the light of love and hope. When they returned to the little house, now their home, Sophia leaned on his shoulder, smiling. "We made it," she said. Nathan kissed her hair, whispering, "And we'll do even more." That night, they slept in each other's arms, the waves lulling them gently, and for the first time, they both believed this happiness was forever. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul and Real Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends to never miss out on touching and meaningful stories. Subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.